It was a moment that unfolded quietly, far from cameras, far from the eyes of the world, deep inside the Vatican's inner chambers where only the most senior cardinals are permitted to enter. Something deeply personal took place, something unexpected, something powerful. It was not a formal announcement. It was not a public declaration. It was something much more intimate, and yet it would ripple beyond those walls, touching lives around the globe. The setting was simple, even understated. A modest room filled with the sound of rustling robes, whispers, and the low murmur of reflection. The tone was solemn. Many of the cardinals had gathered expecting to discuss the concerns that naturally come with age and leadership. Pope Francis, now 88, had been facing health challenges. There had been quiet talk for months. Would he retire? Would he step away? Was a transition near? But no one was prepared for what came next. In that private meeting, a message was delivered, one that carried the weight not of policy but of personal conviction. As the words were spoken, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, known for his calm composure and inner strength, was seen visibly overcome with emotion. Those present said he lowered his head, his eyes filled with tears. Some described it as reverence, others as shock, but all agreed something had just changed. This wasn't just news. It was a request, a final wish, and not just any wish. It was Pope Francis's final wish, a deeply personal desire that he had held in his heart, a message not meant to remain hidden within the walls of the Vatican, but one meant to echo far beyond them, a message meant for the people, meant for the future. Why now? Why this message at this moment? The answer perhaps lies not in the timing, but in the heart of the man himself. Pope Francis, the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit to hold the office, had always walked a different path. From the moment he stepped onto the balcony in 2013, he signaled something new, something personal. He had taken the name Francis in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, a man known for his love of the poor, his simplicity, and his courage to reform from within. And Pope Francis did the same. He rejected the lavish trappings of papal life. No golden throne, no luxurious apartments. Instead, he chose to live simply, to speak plainly, and to walk among the people. He chose mercy over judgment, encounter over institution. He once said, "I want a church that is poor and for the poor." And he meant it. But now, with age catching up and his strength beginning to fade, it seemed that the mission he had begun still felt incomplete. His message to the cardinals that day was not about resignation. It wasn't even about succession in the traditional sense. It was a final offering, a handing over of vision, a torch passed not with force but with hope. Witnesses said that when Cardinal Tagle heard the words, it was as if the weight of that vision landed fully on his shoulders. Known for his deep humility, his warm smile, and his unwavering compassion, Tagle had always been seen as someone close to the Pope, not just geographically but spiritually. He wasn't just a trusted advisor. He was someone who shared Pope Francis's heart. It was not just a wish, one source reportedly whispered. It was a legacy placed in his hands. And that's when the world began asking, what was this message? What did the Pope say that brought one of the most composed cardinals in the Church to tears? What kind of legacy had been entrusted to him? The answer lies not just in the words that were spoken, but in the life of the one who spoke them, the life of Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Before he was Pope Francis, he was simply Jorge, a boy growing up in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He knew what it meant to live with simplicity, to grow up surrounded by working-class values, to find God not in palaces but in street corners, in hospitals, in the laughter and struggle of everyday people. Those early experiences shaped everything. They formed the roots of the papacy that would later transform hearts around the world. When he became Pope in 2013, he chose not just a new name but a new approach. He opened the doors of the Church wider. He preached sermons about love over law, compassion over condemnation. He welcomed the forgotten, sat with the marginalized, and traveled to the edges of the earth to remind people that faith wasn't about exclusion, it was about embrace. But now, with his strength waning, one question lingered: was it enough? Did he feel, perhaps, that his mission was still unfolding? That the message of mercy, inclusion, and simplicity needed to be carried further? That someone would have to continue walking the road he had begun? And that brings us back to the message, back to the moment in that quiet Vatican room, where Luis Antonio Tagle's expression said everything words could not. The Pope's final wish was more than a farewell. It was a gentle handing off of purpose. In most cases, when a pontiff wishes to be remembered, it's through formal documents, encyclicals, apostolic exhortations. But Pope Francis had always led from the heart. He chose relationship over rulebook. His final message wasn't filled with policies or procedures. It was a call, soft but clear, to keep the church human, to keep it kind, to keep it close to the wounded and the forgotten. One Vatican insider explained it this way: Pope Francis didn't want to be remembered for what he reformed. He wanted to be remembered for who would continue transforming. And if anyone understood that vision, it was Cardinal Tagle. So who is this man the Pope trusted so deeply? Let's look closer. Luis Antonio Tagle was born in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, far from the historical power centers of Catholicism. But what he lacked in proximity to Rome, he made up for in spirit. From a young age, Tagle was known for his warmth, his intelligence, and his profound faith. He rose through the ranks not by ambition, but by the quiet power of example. He didn't command attention. He simply lived the gospel with joy, with clarity, and with love, and Pope Francis noticed. Many began calling him the Asian Francis, not because of a shared background, but because of a shared vision. They both believed the church should listen before it speaks, that mercy should precede discipline, that Christ's love should not be hidden behind tradition, but revealed through it. Now, as Tagle stood before the weight of this final message, he carried not only the trust of a pope but perhaps the future of a vision that still has more to give. There are moments in history where the weight of a decision can't be measured by headlines or handshakes, only by the quiet, sacred responsibility it carries. In the case of Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, that weight is something he has never asked for but has always quietly carried. Throughout his life and ministry, Tagle has remained consistent in three defining qualities: humility, compassion, and a deep, unwavering connection to ordinary people. Whether embracing refugees in distant camps or standing among the poor in flooded neighborhoods of Manila, he doesn't visit with detachment. He enters with empathy. He doesn't offer distant blessings. He listens, he weeps, he prays. His presence feels less like a cardinal and more like a brother. That's why so many saw more than coincidence in Pope Francis's decision to keep Tagle close, not just symbolically but strategically. Over the years, Francis entrusted him with some of the Church's most delicate missions. He placed him in key leadership roles that required discernment, not domination. In moments when church politics grew tense and complex, it was Tagle who stood quietly nearby, not to advise with ambition, but to serve with stillness. According to many close observers, when Pope Francis revealed his personal final wish, that deeply human, forward-looking message, it wasn't just an idea he passed on. It was a legacy, and in many ways, it was Luis Antonio Tagle who was quietly chosen to carry it. As one fellow cardinal once said in private, Tagle doesn't just agree with Francis's vision, he is that vision in human form. But stepping into that vision would never be simple. The Church today isn't just navigating a new leader, it is standing before a greater question, one that reaches beyond titles and thrones. The Catholic Church is at a spiritual crossroads where tradition and transformation now meet face to face. This is the moment where our story takes its most critical turn. Right now, the global Church, one of the world's oldest institutions, is confronting a deep and pressing dilemma. It must decide not only who it is, but what it wants to be in a rapidly changing world. On one side of this inner divide stands tradition, rich, sacred, and enduring, rooted in centuries of teaching, rituals, doctrines, and hierarchical stability. It is the pillar that has upheld the faith through generations of change, conflict, and cultural evolution. Tradition is the heartbeat of sacred liturgy, the source of theological depth, the keeper of apostolic memory. It is what gave birth to saints, scholars, martyrs, and missionaries. It is the treasure chest from which the Church has always drawn its spiritual wealth. But on the other side stands something just as urgent, the call for transformation. It is not a call to abandon belief, not a cry to erase doctrine, but a plea for the Church to evolve with the world it serves, to speak to modern hearts without compromising ancient truths. It is the voice of those who feel unseen, unheard, or misunderstood. It is the cry of the young, the wounded, the questioning. It is the call of the future, asking not for a church that bends to the world but one that walks alongside it. Pope Francis understood this delicate balance. His final wish didn't ignore the divide, it faced it directly. He knew that preserving the soul of the Church meant listening to the world outside its walls, especially to those who have felt forgotten. His message wasn't just about succession, it was about identity. It was about asking the next generation, what kind of church do we want to become? And that's where Cardinal Tagle stands, uniquely, vulnerably, and profoundly. He is one of the few figures in the modern church who has earned the respect of both sides. Theologians and traditional clergy admire his loyalty to doctrine, his deep study of Catholic teaching, and his ability to articulate the Church's teachings with clarity. At the same time, the faithful who hunger for renewal see in him a pastor who does not merely speak about the poor, he lives among them. He doesn't speak loudly, but his compassion resonates. He doesn't demand attention, he draws it gently. In many ways, he doesn't force change, he reflects it. That kind of quiet transformation may be the most powerful of all because it doesn't shatter, it reshapes. It doesn't divide, it invites. It doesn't threaten, it offers. Still, let's be honest, this is no easy road. Within the Vatican, there are voices, sincere, faithful voices, who worry that any shift too sudden or too sweeping could damage what the Church has guarded for centuries. They fear that changing language too quickly could confuse doctrine. They fear that opening the door too wide could lose the sense of reverence that once defined the faith. This isn't just about a new pope, one Vatican insider confided. It's about a new church. That realization has made some uneasy because change, even gentle change, can feel like loss when tradition is all one has known. But beyond the walls of St. Peter's, another voice is rising, the voice of everyday believers, especially young Catholics, who aren't abandoning their faith, but are asking it to walk with them. They're not asking for perfection, they're asking for presence. They're asking for a church that acknowledges their doubts, speaks to their reality, and reminds them that holiness is still possible in a complicated world. And among all the leaders being looked at in this time of uncertainty, Cardinal Tagle seems to be the one many believe can hold both sides together, not because he's perfect, but because he's real. Because he understands that faith doesn't have to be loud to be alive. It just has to be honest. This isn't just a moment of transition. It's a spiritual test, the kind of test where the Church must ask itself, can we remain faithful to the gospel while still being truly present in the lives of today's people? Can we honor the past without fearing the future? Can we be both ancient and alive? For Luis Antonio Tagle, the answer lies not in speeches or campaigns. It lies in quietly living the answer. And perhaps in God's providence, that quiet strength is exactly what the Church needs next. Will the Church choose to hold tightly to the comforts of the past, not out of conviction, but out of fear of losing its foundation? Or will it rise courageously, stepping into the future, not with anxiety but with faith? These are not abstract questions. They are the ones quietly reverberating through the corridors of the Vatican and echoing across parishes around the world. This could very well be the most pivotal moment in modern church history, perhaps even the most important turning point since its earliest centuries. Many believe the stakes are higher than ever. As attention grows and speculation swirls around Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle's place in this unfolding story, a new question is beginning to emerge, one even more compelling than the rest. Has the decision already been made? Though no official word has been spoken and no white smoke has risen, the signs are becoming difficult to ignore. The whispers in Rome are getting louder. That emotional moment when Cardinal Tagle was seen wiping away tears after the confidential message was read has become the subject of global reflection. To many, it was not simply a display of sadness or honor. It was a glimpse into something far deeper, something known only to a few, something that felt final. But to understand what might be unfolding behind closed doors, we must go behind the curtain into one of the most sacred and secretive traditions in the world, the papal conclave. For centuries, the election of a pope has stood as one of the Church's most guarded rites. It is a ritual wrapped in prayer, discernment, and profound mystery. Unlike political elections or public ceremonies, there are no cameras, no media panels, no live debates. Once the cardinals enter the conclave, held within the solemn beauty of the Sistine Chapel, the world outside fades away. The doors are locked. Silence reigns. Only the Holy Spirit is invited in. And from that moment on, the world can do nothing but wait, watching a simple chimney, hoping for a sign. Black smoke means no consensus. White smoke means the church has a new shepherd. Simple, right? But what if this time it's not so simple? What if the direction had already been set in motion long before the ballots were ever counted? In recent weeks, discussions inside Vatican circles have turned from mere predictions to something far more provocative. The idea is quietly spreading that Pope Francis, aware of his physical limitations and the ideological divisions within the Church, may have gently paved the way for a successor who shares his heart and vision. Now, according to tradition and canon law, a sitting pope cannot choose the next pope. The Church has long held that the process must remain free from direct appointment, a safeguard designed to ensure that the selection is made through prayer, reflection, and the free cooperation of the cardinals with the will of God. But there is a difference between naming a successor and shaping one. There is influence. And Pope Francis, if nothing else, has always been strategic in how he leads. Over the course of his papacy, he has carefully chosen cardinals who align with his emphasis on mercy, social justice, humility, and a church that goes out to the peripheries. He has quietly created a voting body, a conclave, made up largely of men who understand and support the values he has tirelessly promoted. These are the very men who will cast their votes when the time comes. Coincidence? Perhaps, but others see it as intentional preparation not for control, but for continuity. And then, of course, came the moment that caught the world's attention when Cardinal Tagle, a man known for inner peace and quiet strength, was seen with tears in his eyes during the private reading of Pope Francis's final personal message. It wasn't staged. It wasn't rehearsed, it was real and raw, and it changed everything. To those watching closely, it felt like the silent passing of a torch, not declared but deeply felt. As one insider quietly reflected, "The torch doesn't need to be passed publicly to be received." Could it be that within the Pope's final private words, there was a gentle yet unmistakable hope, a heartfelt desire for Tagle to carry the Church forward? Not a command, not a decree, but a whisper, a spiritual handover born from trust. If that's true, it changes the way we see everything that has followed. The conclave will still unfold with its sacred rituals, the ballots will still be cast, the white smoke will still rise, but to those who know how the Church moves beneath the surface, through years of formation, through relationships built in silence, through moments of sacred mentorship, it's possible the outcome may already be taking shape, not through manipulation but through deep, quiet trust. And now all eyes are on Tagle, not because he has said anything to suggest he seeks the papacy. Far from it. He remains humble, often avoiding the spotlight. He walks quietly, speaks carefully, and deflects attention. But that very silence has become louder than words, and each time he appears at an event, every gesture is watched, every pause, every word not spoken is analyzed. People wonder, is he preparing for something he never asked for but now must accept? Because emotions, like his tears shed among fellow cardinals, don't come from nowhere. They come from a moment of realization, the moment a man understands that his life is about to change forever. Has the next pope already been chosen? Not by official vote, not by decree, but by the quiet guidance of a leader saying goodbye and the unspoken unity of those who loved him enough to listen. That question now floats through Rome's ancient alleyways, whispered beneath colonnades and murmured through candle-lit chapels. It is the kind of question no one inside the Vatican will ever publicly answer, but many are thinking it. And while Cardinal Tagle remains silent, the world can only wonder, why did that moment shake him so deeply? What truth lies behind those tears? Let's take a closer look at the man himself, not through headlines or speculation, but through the one language that cannot lie, emotion. Because when words fall short, tears speak the truth the heart already knows. And Cardinal Tagle's tears may have just spoken the first chapter of something sacred, something eternal, a beginning that may already be written in silence. It wasn't just a private moment of mourning. It was a moment when the full weight of expectation settled on one man's shoulders, not because he asked for it, but because someone else believed he could carry it. For Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, the tears he shed during the private gathering of senior church leaders weren't just about grief. They reflected something more profound, the quiet, crushing awareness of what Pope Francis's last wish implied. Imagine being seen not as the most powerful, not as the most ambitious, but as the most trusted. Imagine realizing that someone you deeply admire, someone who shaped your spiritual journey, saw you not just as a companion in faith, but as the one who might lead the church forward. That kind of trust is a beautiful honor, but it's also a burden. Because stepping into that role, the papacy, isn't just about accepting a title. It's about taking on the hopes of over 1 billion souls, carrying the dreams of both progressives and traditionalists, and walking a line so thin that every step becomes a trial. As one cardinal quietly shared after witnessing Tagle's emotional response, those were not just tears of grief. They were tears of knowing. But does Tagle even want the role? That question remains unanswered and perhaps even unanswerable. Because fulfilling a final wish is one thing, but embracing the weight of history is another. Sources close to the moment say that following the private announcement, Cardinal Tagle withdrew for hours of deep personal reflection. No statements, no appearances, just silence. And in that silence, there was a visible tension, a man caught between personal humility and global responsibility. A man who has spent his life walking beside the poor now faced the possibility of standing alone at the summit of an ancient institution. But while Tagle prays and remains silent, the Church itself continues to evolve. Because ultimately, Pope Francis's final wish wasn't just about a successor, it was about direction, a shift in the very soul of the Church. So what does that shift look like? How could this quiet moment behind closed Vatican doors ripple out and redefine the Catholic Church as we know it? Let's step back. For over 2,000 years, the heart of Catholicism has beat from its historic center, the grand cathedrals of Europe. From St. Peter's Basilica to Notre Dame, the Church's image has long been shaped by Western architecture, philosophy, and leadership. The voices of Rome, Paris, and Madrid guided the flock. But Pope Francis, always the pastor of the peripheries, envisioned something different. His last wish wasn't simply about who would wear white in the Vatican. It was about re-entering the Church's spiritual compass. No longer a church that speaks to the world from Europe, but one that speaks with the world, especially the unheard. He saw the rising tide of faith not in Europe's aging cathedrals, but in the thriving, struggling, and deeply spiritual communities of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. These regions now hold the fastest-growing Catholic populations. And yet, for centuries, their voices were echoes in the vast chambers of power. Francis's final message was clear. It's time for the Church to reflect the world it serves, not as a token gesture of diversity, but as a foundational shift. And at the center of this shift stands Cardinal Tagle, a man from the Philippines, a nation where Catholicism is not a weekend obligation, but the very rhythm of life. Where rosaries are held in calloused hands and processions wind through crowded streets. A place where faith isn't studied from books alone. It's lived in every trial, every celebration, every prayer whispered in the dark. Tagle isn't just a bishop. He's a symbol, a leader who understands the meaning of poverty because he's lived among the poor, a shepherd who speaks about compassion not as a doctrine, but as a daily responsibility. Fluent in several languages, but fluent most of all in the universal language of empathy, if he were to ascend to the papacy, it wouldn't just be a new chapter for the Church. It would be a new book entirely. A historic moment where, for the first time, the center of gravity shifts from the marble of Europe to the vibrant faith of the margins. Where a child in Manila or a family in Nairobi feels just as seen and heard as the faithful in Paris or Milan. As Pope Francis once said, "The future of the Church is not in the past, it is in the margins." And that's exactly where Tagle comes from. Not from palaces or politics, but from streets filled with struggle and grace, from places where faith isn't elegant, it's essential. But make no mistake, this shift won't be easy. Change, especially in institutions as old and rooted as the Catholic Church, often feels like loss to some. There are those who believe the Church's identity is tied to its traditional centers, to the rituals, languages, and structures that have endured through centuries. They worry that expanding too far, too quickly, could risk losing what makes the Church distinct. For every believer who celebrates the possibility of a more inclusive, globally representative Church, there are others who quietly, or not so quietly, prepare to resist. Because this is not just a change in leadership, it is a battle over identity. Will the Church rise to meet a world that is crying for inclusion, healing, and relevance? Or will it retreat to the safety of familiar corridors? That's the tension. And it all rests on one quiet man, Luis Antonio Tagle. Because if he does step forward, not for himself but in fulfillment of Pope Francis's vision, he won't just walk into St. Peter's Basilica as a new leader. He'll step into a storm of challenges the Church has not fully faced. A world where moral authority is questioned, where transparency is demanded, where ancient structures are met with modern skepticism, where faith for many is no longer inherited but must be re-earned. Leading in that world will require more than a kind smile. It will require courage, clarity, and compassion under pressure. And so we ask, can he do it? Can Tagle fulfill the impossible and lead the Church into its future? That's the question we now face. At the heart of this unfolding story is not just the question of leadership, but the weight of the journey that lies ahead. A journey through stormy waters not stirred by public criticism or media speculation, but by the far more complex and delicate currents inside the Church itself. Because perhaps the most formidable challenges Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle may face, if he chooses to carry out Pope Francis's final wish, will not come from the outside world at all. They will come from within. Behind the marble columns of the Vatican, beneath the grandeur of its domes and courtyards, lies a world that many never see, a world of internal currents, silent alliances, and powerful factions. While the Vatican is built on faith, it is also woven with human history, And like any institution that has survived for centuries, it is filled with different voices, visions, and convictions. Within these sacred walls, not every voice agrees with reform. There are those who believe the Church must hold fast to its ancient forms, not simply as a matter of preference, but as a matter of survival. They see every step toward inclusivity as a step away from sacred order, every attempt at modernization as a threat to the eternal truths they have vowed to protect. These are not small disagreements. These are deep theological battle lines, battles fought not with violence, but with influence. For anyone who dares to lead change within the Church, those lines are impossible to ignore. Even if Pope Francis's last wish quietly pointed toward Tagle as his spiritual successor, it does not guarantee the journey would be smooth. History has shown time and again that popes who try to transform too much too fast often walk a lonely road. Many begin with celebration and hope, but soon find themselves surrounded by voices of doubt, resistance, and even betrayal. The same cardinals who smiled during the election may fall silent when the reforms begin. This is the storm waiting on the other side of the white smoke for Tagle. The tears he shed during the announcement of Pope Francis's wish were not tears of victory. They were not tears of power. They were the tears of a man who knows what lies ahead and who feels the impossible burden of the task before him. Tagle never asked for this. He has never positioned himself as the next leader of the global Church. He has never courted influence, never spoken of succession. His entire ministry has been marked not by ambition, but by availability. He listens before he speaks. He walks slowly through crowds so that no one is left unseen. And yet, in a moment he did not choose, the weight of 1 billion hopes may now rest on his shoulders. That's why the pressure is not just political, it is spiritual. To fulfill Pope Francis's final wish, to truly continue the path of compassion, humility, and inclusion, Tagle would need to lead not with authority alone, but with courage. The courage to stay grounded in truth even when challenged, the wisdom to navigate disagreement without bitterness, and the strength to remain compassionate even when compassion is misunderstood. He would need to walk a razor-thin line, honoring centuries of sacred tradition, while daring to bring the Church into deeper dialogue with the modern world. It is a task that requires more than theology. It requires heart, it requires sacrifice, and most of all, it requires resolve. Now the world watches and waits. Catholics across continents hold their breath, not for spectacle, but for guidance. Will Tagle step forward? Will he rise to meet this moment, not because it brings prestige, but because it fulfills a vision bigger than himself? Will he become the bridge between the Church of yesterday and the Church of tomorrow? And if he does, if he embraces this path not out of personal desire, but out of faithful obedience, how will he be received? Will he be welcomed as a beacon of hope, a pastor who understands both tradition and transformation? Or will he find himself surrounded by silence, resisted by those who fear what change might cost? There are no easy answers, because this is not just about a new face in the Vatican. It is about the soul of the Church, about whether it can truly be universal, not only in name but in voice. It is about whether it can listen as well as it proclaims, whether it can heal as well as it guards. And Cardinal Tagle, whether he likes it or not, may now stand at the center of that question. One thing is certain, the path ahead will not be easy. It will demand everything from him, his prayer life, his intellect, his peace, his patience, and perhaps even his health. He will be asked to navigate storms most cannot see, to speak truth when silence feels safer, to walk with saints and skeptics alike, and to carry the fragile dreams of a Church that is desperate to be both holy and human. And if he chooses to say yes, not to power but to purpose, the world will see a leader not made by ambition but by trust. This was never just about a title, never just about wearing the white vestments or stepping out onto the balcony of St. Peter's to greet the world. This moment, This unfolding drama of faith and legacy is about something much deeper. It's about the possible transformation of an institution that has shaped human history for over 2 millennia. It's about the future of the Catholic Church, not just in structure but in soul. Standing at the center of it all, not by ambition but by quiet trust, is Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. For many, he now represents a bridge, a man poised between fear and faith, tradition and transformation, silence and calling. He never asked for this role, and yet it may be his to carry. But one question now echoes louder than the rest, one that will define not just the fate of a man, but the future of the Church he may one day lead. Will Pope Francis's final wish truly come to life? Now, as the dust begins to settle around the Cardinal's announcement, as the media shifts its gaze, and the faithful continue to wait, the world is left wondering. Will the deeply emotional, personal wish of a pope nearing the end of his journey be honored, or will it quietly dissolve into the archives of Vatican history, remembered only by those who stood in the room that day? Luis Antonio Tagle has yet to speak publicly about what happened. He has not given interviews, nor has he issued any formal response. But perhaps that silence is not emptiness. Perhaps it's reverence, because some truths are too sacred to speak aloud. Those who know Tagle well say he's always been a man of depth, someone who reflects deeply before stepping forward, someone who speaks less with grand declarations and more with gentle action. His silence in the face of this moment may speak more powerfully than any words. But the question remains, will he step forward when the time comes? Because ultimately, the decision lies not in one man's hands, but in the hands of the College of Cardinals, those entrusted to cast their vote, guided by prayer, conscience, and, if tradition holds, the breath of the Holy Spirit. And yet, even if the votes are not yet cast, the spirit of Francis's final message already lingers. It hovers over every conversation, every quiet meeting, every reflection being held behind closed doors. His call was not for power. It was not even for change's sake. It was a call for compassion over condemnation, presence over pride, mercy over might. A church that serves, not just proclaims. A church that walks not above the people but beside them. That is the legacy Pope Francis hoped to pass on, and that legacy now hangs delicately in the balance. From the pews of cathedrals in Brazil to the quiet chapels of South Korea, from village churches in Uganda to bustling parishes in New York, millions are watching. They are not just watching to see who will be chosen, but to see what kind of church will emerge. Because this moment is not only about selecting a new pope, it's about choosing the direction of one of the most enduring institutions the world has ever known. Will the Church retreat to the security of tradition alone, or will it step forward into a deeper kind of faith? One that listens, heals, and renews? Will the vision of Pope Francis, a church that embraces the suffering, lifts the marginalized, and recenters its mission around mercy, find a new shepherd to carry it? Or will centuries of inertia, the weight of protocol and precedent, resist the winds of change? No one knows. But in the heart of this uncertainty, there is a light, a possibility that the next pope might not come from marble palaces or political alliances, but from the margins, from a life lived close to the poor, the wounded, the forgotten. And if it is Luis Antonio Tagle who steps forward, the Church will not simply gain a new leader. It will gain a reflection of its global family, a leader from the people, for the people. In a world fractured by division and fatigue, that kind of leadership could mean everything. And so we return to the words of Pope Francis himself, a man whose life has always pointed away from himself and towards service. The measure of greatness is not in power, he once said. It is in service. If that's true, then perhaps greatness is already waiting, not in thrones, but in tears, not in titles, but in trust, not in history alone, but in the brave hearts willing to shape what comes next. Now we find ourselves standing at the edge of something sacred, not just at the end of a story, but at the very threshold of history. Because no matter what unfolds next, no matter who is chosen or how the path forward takes shape, one truth remains unshaken. Pope Francis's final wish was never meant to be a farewell. It was never a closing chapter. It was never a soft goodbye hidden in Vatican ceremony. No, it was a beginning, a spark, a quiet but urgent call to action. A call to the Church to remember who it serves. A call to its leaders to walk with courage and humility. And a call to every believer to hold fast to love in a time of fear, and to live mercy in a world too used to judgment. This is more than a story of succession. It's the story of a soul trying to leave behind not a monument, but a mission. Now the question isn't just what will happen in the next conclave. The real question is what we will do with what we've heard. Will the Church answer the call to be more human, more present, more compassionate? Will we, as a global community of faith, carry that final wish forward even if the road ahead is difficult? The days to come may bring surprises, or they may unfold just as many have quietly anticipated. Either way, history is already shifting. The conversations have begun. The future has been stirred. And somewhere, perhaps in silence, a man kneels, not seeking power, but preparing for service. Because the true legacy of a great leader is not found in what he controlled, but in who continues the work after he's gone. So stay with us, because this story is far from over.